In today's games, we expect destruction. It's almost second nature. You fire a rocket, throw a grenade, or detonate something and it gets out of your way. In fact, as a part of unscripted gameplay, buildings crumble, covers splinter, and entire environments react like living, breathing parts of the battlefield. And it's not just first-person shooters anymore. Destruction mechanics has bled into quite a few genres. But it wasn't always like this. There was a time when walls were invincible, when vehicles were indestructible, and the environment was little more than painted scenery. The journey from static worlds to fully destructible playgrounds wasn't a straight line. It was a series of small steps and a few massive leaps. One particularly in the early 2000s, another in the late 2000s. And to really understand how we got here, we need to go all the way back to the early 90s when destruction was barely a dream. This is the story of slow innovation, of bold experiments, and a few games that changed everything. Eventually, that path leads us straight into the hands of some true pioneers and into the middle of some infamously bad company. Alright, let's establish a baseline from one of the most popular pioneers of FPS back in the early 90s and start off with Wolfenstein 3D from May of '92. Although Wolfenstein paved the core formula for first-person shooters, walls, doors, floors, you name it, everything was static and untouchable. The only interactions with the environment involved opening doors or finding hidden passages, so the concept of changing or damaging the world through player action just did not exist yet. Fast forward a few years, and Duke Nukem 3D brought a new level of environmental interactivity. Players could break glass, operate switches, and destroy smaller props scattered throughout the levels. Although the game's walls and structures were still invulnerable, the basic destructibility made levels feel more alive and reactive. It hinted at how satisfying it could be if the environment itself could be a part of the gameplay. That said, the trend of destructible environments or objects was yet to properly kick off, as another legendary game such as Goldeneye from the summer of '97 still kept things mostly cosmetic. Players could leave bullet marks on walls and destroy smaller objects, but the level structures remained entirely unchanged. There were of course Bond's iconic gadgets that you could use to carve new paths, but they served as a part of a linear script as opposed to player agency. 1 year later, Valve's iconic Half-Life from November of '98 pushed boundaries on so many fronts when it comes to video games in general, one of which was incorporating micro-destruction ubiquitously into its gameplay. Half-Life also made scripted environmental destruction a key part of its storytelling, and, apart from those, shattering glass and especially destroying wooden crates for resources was a core part of the gameplay now. Although Valve made the world feel far more reactive than previous shooters and raised expectations for environmental design, you still couldn't destroy much without it being scripted or being small in scale like the wooden boxes. A true step forward, hence, would not arrive until a few years later. The true first breakthrough in environmental destruction for first-person shooters came from a rather unlikely source with Red Faction, released in May of 2001. Powered by Volition's groundbreaking Geomod engine, Red Faction introduced real, player-driven destruction to the genre. Players could finally blast through walls, floors, and even rock formations, creating alternate paths that sometimes fundamentally changed how you could play the level. Not every surface was destructible, and the system did have its limitations, but it was the first time destruction felt meaningfully tied to gameplay rather than existing purely for spectacle. It was a landmark achievement, not just for shooters, but for gaming as a whole. And considering this was still the very early era of 3D graphics, Volition's innovation in environmental interaction was nothing short of remarkable. The game was overall met with strong praise from critics and players alike, setting the stage perfectly for a sequel. However, Red Faction 2 stumbled. Despite the foundation laid by the original, the sequel introduced design choices that shifted focus away from environmental destruction, the very feature that had set Red Faction apart. Following that, destruction in first-person shooters didn't disappear, but it largely stalled. Throughout the mid-2000s, a few games experimented with the concept, adding minor effects, better scripted sequences, or limited environmental damage, but these were small iterations rather than true evolution. So the core idea of player-driven destruction, once pioneered by Red Faction, remained mostly dormant, waiting for its next major leap forward. Moving on to the mid-2000s, both computer hardware and game engines began taking major leaps forward, allowing 3D games to finally reach decently realistic levels of graphical fidelity. In early 2004, Crytek's FarCry continued more of the same, with players being able to destroy vehicles and other small props like explosive barrels, but not much else. Later that same year, however, Valve released its landmark Source engine, utilized by one of gaming's most cherished masterpieces, Half-Life 2. While Half-Life 2 didn't offer freeform destruction, just like many that preceded it, it advanced environmental interaction dramatically. Using various weapons, and especially the newly introduced gravity gun, players could manipulate, move, and destroy smaller objects like wooden barriers, explosive barrels, glasses, and other objects and debris. Scripted destruction sequences also returned during key moments, adding cinematic weight to the experience. Even though players still couldn't demolish buildings or reshape entire levels, the reactive physics system made the world feel more alive and dynamic than almost anything that had come before. So yes, the Source engine was truly revolutionary for its time for its incredible physics simulation and ragdoll mechanics. But large-scale destruction, especially the ability to tear down walls or level structures, was still not a core part of the gameplay or the engine itself. Released only a year later, both F.E.A.R. and Call of Duty 2 struggled to match the impact of Half-Life 2 or the original Red Faction in terms of destruction. They did, however, have their own highlights. F.E.A.R. placed a strong emphasis on visualizing impact during combat. Gunfights caused walls to chip apart, glass to shatter, and debris to scatter across the environment. While none of this destruction altered the level layout or opened up new paths like many that preceded it, the detailed particle effects gave each firefight an intense, violent atmosphere. Even today, the smoke, spark, and particle effects still hold up remarkably well, delivering a powerful illusion of impact. It genuinely felt like you're wielding destructive force, even though technically you're not. In a way, this proved that even purely cosmetic effects could dramatically elevate immersion by making players feel like they were altering the environment even when they weren't. Released 1 year later, Black followed a similar design philosophy. To its credit, it went a step further than F.E.A.R., allowing players to blast open doors with shotguns, destroy parked cars, and trigger explosive chain reactions. In fact, it was sometimes almost too easy to blow things up. Although some of its scripted destruction events were especially well executed, adding cinematic flair to the action, Black was still largely more of the same, iterating on certain ideas that other shooters had only lightly touched, but without fundamentally changing how destruction, at a large scale, worked in the genre. Then came 2007, the year the now iconic phrase, "But can it run Crysis?" was born. Crysis was a landmark release, years ahead of its time and infamous for its demanding hardware requirements. Alongside its many technical achievements, it pushed destructibility further into the realm of tactical gameplay. Players could destroy vehicles, wooden huts, watchtowers, and even break down trees, using the environment to their advantage. While it was a strong step forward, larger concrete structures and most of the terrain still remained indestructible. Still, Crysis stood out for integrating destruction into gameplay in a way that felt deliberate and satisfying, coupled with graphics that was simply unmatched at the time. 2007 was indeed a great year for first-person shooters as it brought another genre-defining title, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. By this point, the Call of Duty series had already earned widespread acclaim from both critics and fans alike, delivering polished gameplay, cinematic storytelling, and fun multiplayer action. If we loosen our definition of destruction here, then the series certainly delivered plenty of memorable, high-impact moments in scripted sequences. But despite all of its strengths, destruction was never a core part of the Call of Duty experience. In fact, as the franchise evolved, many began to criticize its lack of environmental physics and interactivity compared to the evolving competition. While early Call of Duty games helped push the genre forward in many key areas, destruction simply wasn't one of them. That honor was bestowed, instead, upon Battlefield. It's 2008, and DICE releases Battlefield: Bad Company, the first title to utilize the then-new Frostbite engine and introduce what they called Destruction 1.0. While the game had many high points, its 4 memorable characters, an excellent soundtrack, decent visuals, and fluid gunplay, what truly set it apart was its revolutionary approach to environmental destruction. For the first time in a modern FPS, players could blow holes through walls, destroy cover, and collapse parts of buildings in the middle of combat. What made this especially enjoyable was the ubiquitous underbarrel grenade launcher, which made destruction extremely fluid, intuitive, and very satisfying. This attachment became an iconic element of both Bad Company titles, as it allowed players to strip away enemy cover with ease and agency, rather than relying on scripted moments or having to switch to heavier, slower weapons like RPGs. This integration of destruction with moment-to-moment gameplay was seamless, never feeling like a burden or a gimmick. Here's an ancient clip from the making of Bad Company, with a DICE developer talking about this almost 2 decades ago.
Hi, I'm Joachim, and I'm here to talk about destruction. Everything from buildings to vehicles to trees and the actual ground you're walking on, it can and it will be destroyed.
As mentioned, beyond breaking fences and felling trees, what truly blew players' minds at the time was the ability to level entire walls of structures. So let's dig a bit deeper here. The method DICE used in Destruction 1.0 was relatively straightforward. Each building was designed with predefined destructible exterior walls. As long as your explosive hit one of these walls' hitbox, it would generate debris and smoke that then revealed a partial collapse. This gave the illusion of near-total destructibility, even though in reality, interior walls and core structures still remained intact. In fact, no matter how many rounds you fired, you couldn't bring down an entire building in Bad Company. Hence, although the destruction was powerful, it was still fundamentally limited to the building envelope. Yet, despite these constraints, Bad Company's approach to destruction was light years ahead of anything in the FPS genre at the time. That's why Bad Company stands at the center of this video. It was more than just a great shooter, but a technical leap in its own right. This innovation also marked a turning point in the evolving rivalry between Battlefield and Call of Duty. Since the early 2000s, Battlefield had carved out its niche in larger-scale, team-based multiplayer, while Call of Duty dominated with cinematic campaigns and fast-paced, close-quarters action. Up until this point, in both franchises, destruction had mostly been an afterthought, limited to scripted sequences or small destructible props, as both series pivoted toward Modern Warfare around the same time. While Modern Warfare 4 set a new standard for narrative and tight gunplay, Bad Company redefined the battlefield, literally with dynamic destruction. At this point, the divergence between the two was clear. The former emphasized spectacle and fast pace, the latter, player-driven chaos. While Call of Duty followed up with Modern Warfare 2 in 2009, EA responded with Bad Company 2 in 2010, and it remains, to this day, a hallmark of the genre. Battlefield 2 improved on its predecessor in every way, and destruction in particular was taken to the next level. Gunplay felt tighter, visuals were crisper, and the scale of destructibility was simply unmatched. This time, thanks to Destruction 2.0, you could level entire structures by systemically destroying enough of their load-bearing walls. The old limitation of indestructible building cores was gone. Hence, in both campaign and multiplayer, this changed how you played. Camping in buildings was no longer safe, and any cover could not be relied on for too long. The chaos was fun, it was unpredictable, and again, it was very satisfying. In fact, the destruction mechanics in Bad Company 2 and its seamless integration to its gameplay were so good that DICE arguably never fully recaptured that magic again for a long time. While fans may debate which Battlefield had the best version of destruction, as Battlefield 1 does stand out as another fantastic installment in this regard, few would dispute that Bad Company 2 set the gold standard for destruction that has stood the test of time. It's hard to believe, but it's now been 15 years since that landmark release. What's sad is that aside from Battlefield 1 and the recent multiplayer-only title The Finals, it's hard to name another FPS that has truly championed destruction as a core gameplay mechanic, in a way that feels both meaningful and fun. Yes, we can give honorable mentions to Battlefield 3, 4, and 5, yet none of them, at least in my opinion, managed to reach the heights of Bad Company 2 when it comes to dynamic, satisfying destruction. Hence, to this day, no game has quite captured the same blend of explosive freedom, clever level design, and satisfying gunplay in a modern setting. In its last iteration, Battlefield lost what made it matter. The chaos became noise, the destruction became background, and the soul, the thing that made it unforgettable, faded. But for those of us who remember Bad Company 2, who felt the grit of its battles and the weight of every crumbling wall, it hasn't been forgotten. Battlefield 1 reminded us, if only for a moment, of how much meaning can be found in the rubble of the Great War. These two weren't just games, they were statements. And maybe for the next one, DICE and the others will remember what once was. As a core, fluid part of the gameplay, coupled with incredible graphics, sound design, and setting like Bad Company or Battlefield 1, destruction isn't just a feature. It was and still is the soul of what makes Battlefield, Battlefield. Thank you so much for watching and choosing to spend some of your time here at Game Noob. I should finally be able to get back to uploading frequently, so if you'd like to watch more of this type of content, please consider subscribing for more quality commentaries and game reviews. Your support is always appreciated. Take care everyone, and see you all in the next one.